Monet, and every 25th of January we tend to recall a version of Robert Burns that's romantic, the simple ploughman poet. Yet his work was often radical and subversive, so much so that Burns didn't dare put his name to many of his now best-known poems like A Man's a Man. And it's this rebellious side that appeals to my next guest, no stranger himself to radical thinking. Kevin Williamson, founder of the underground magazine Rebel Inc., is here to give us a flavour of his multimedia fringe show, Robert Burns' Not in My Name, which reveals the poet as a man of his time and ours. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hello, Claire.
Lovely to have you on. You've had a long love affair with Burns' work. Where did the idea for this show come from, though?
It was 2009, the whole celebrations of Burns, and I felt that the real essence of Burns, not the ploughman poet, not the guy who wrote all the love songs, these are beautiful pieces, but the real essence of him was a political radical, an old-fashioned Scottish radical, very seditious, a patriotic person, and I felt this was kind of airbrushed out of it, and I've started developing a few ideas along these lines and how I could maybe try and put that centre stage again.
And you really get into it, I believe.
Yeah, it's quite a physically demanding performance, and I really love it.
OK, now we're not going to see Burns, as you've just told us, as this romantic poet, but the rebel. And fittingly, the first image, because we will see images, is of the poet as another iconic rebel, Che Guevara. Pretty effective as a piece of iconography, isn't it? It sets the tone of the show.
Absolutely. And I love the fact it's a kind of morphed picture between Che Guevara and Burns. They're both two very iconic pictures. But I wanted to try and set the tone of Burns being a revolutionary. You know, his life was shaped by two great revolutions, the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And in both times he opposed his own government and supported the ideals of the French and American Revolution. So I thought, you know, it's an appropriate image, I felt.
Now, you're saying he's radical. Just how radical? Because I know he wrote some stuff that was extremely provocative. For example, he refers to Marie Antoinette as a prostitute. Put some comment on that in the context of the times, would you?
Well, Burns led a double life, I think, for the last 4 years of his life. From 1792 to 1796, he was an exciseman on the surface, but underneath he was engaging and mixing with people who were quite seditious revolutionaries and people who'd even been to the execution of King Louis in France, such as Dr. Maxwell in Dumfries. And these were Burns's friends. And his ideas were developing towards equality, towards the whole concept of, he didn't use the word democracy, but they're developing a democratic direction. And recent research seems to suggest that Burns was possibly active within the Friends of the People in Scotland, which I find is an absolutely astonishing thing that puts him centre stage.
Explain what that is then, the Friends of the People.
The Friends of the People was an organisation that lasted for 2 years, from 1792 to 1794, before it was crushed by the British government. And they were the first organisation in Scotland to call for the vote for men of all classes. So Burns, if he was a member of this, he was a forerunner of the suffragettes and the Chartists. He was there at the very beginning of the struggle for democracy, which I think casts a slightly different light on him from the one that we're normally used to seeing.
Yeah, now, as we said, you are totally immersed in this performance, a real ferocity to your recitation. Tell us what we can expect in terms of the format. How many poems and how does it all hang together?
There are 12 poems, and I'm doing them in chronological order, the way he wrote, in the order that he wrote them, and so they span the last 10 or 11 years of his life. Before each poem, there's an absolutely beautiful film by Alistair Cooke, which puts it into its context, its historical context, and some of his personal context. So there'll be 12 films and 12 performances between them. So the time passes quite quickly because it's a fast-flowing show. Some of the poems are, as you say, they're quite ferocious. Others are more tender, and there's one or two that are quite cheeky. And
yes, we're keeping some of those out of the broadcast today because you're going to perform one for us right now, aren't you? Tell us a little bit about that.
It's a poem that Robert Burns wrote in 1787. He was doing a tour and he'd come to a pub in Stirling, and I think he maybe had a few glasses of wine, and as the night progressed, he decided to etch a poem into the window of the pub using a diamond, either a diamond ring or a diamond stylus. He was a graffiti artist in his own time. He wrote a lot of poetry in pub windows. And this one was a poem that he wrote after he'd been to the Royal Palace, the old Stuart's Royal Palace in Stirling, and he'd seen it in ruins. and he wrote quite a diatribe. It's a very short piece, and it's something that I don't think he would have expressed these sentiments normally, but maybe after a few glasses he came out with the truth, as I
hope
say.
it's clean, right? Okay. Or
Yes,
as clean as you can
clean.
make it. Okay. Right, on your own time.
It's called Written by Somebody on the Window of an Inn in Stirling upon seeing the Royal Palace in Ruins. Here Stuarts once in triumph reigned, and laws for Scotland's weal ordained. But now unroofed their palace stands, their sceptre fallen to other hands, fallen indeed and to the earth, whence grovelling reptiles take their birth. The injured Stuart line is gone, a race outlandish fills their throne, an idiot race to honour lost, who know them best, despise them most.
I think we know what he's getting at there. Just tell me, as you were working on this show, you obviously noticed a lot of parallels with what's happening kind of politically today. Burns is hugely relevant, thinking of lines like, the waste of war, things like that. And obviously that's got a resonance for somebody like you. You are a bit of a rebel yourself.
Yeah, I've took part in the anti-war movements against the Iraq War and such like. And there's a couple of anti-war poems in this, A Murder Hate. And I think that there is a resonance with, there's a resonance with what's happening now with a lot of the ideas that Burns stood upon. And I've tried to encapsulate that in some of the graphic imagery within the performance itself. The poems will be performed to changing graphic images.
Yeah, you've got a few rather interesting people flashed up there. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm keeping some of them a surprise. Some of them have got surprise value, but yeah, they're very contemporary images.
Okay.
And the idea behind that came from Robert Burns himself. I was reading a letter that Burns had written at the time he wrote Scots Wha Hae, Robert Bruce's March to Bannockburn, and the poem itself is ostensibly about Robert Bruce's speech to his troops at Bannockburn, but in a private letter, Burns describes it as being about struggles not quite so ancient. And I've taken that concept as the theme to perform in Burns's poetry. So the images are about struggles not quite so ancient compared to when Burns wrote the actual text. So the idea came from Burns himself to put these contemporary images.
When you look at the poems, which for you is the most controversial one?
Without a doubt, I would say The Tree of Liberty. It's controversial for all sorts of reasons, but not least because it's quite a ferocious poem at parts. But in the poem, he seems to mock the execution of King Louis. He even seems to herald the guillotine as a kind of an avenging angel against the opponents of the French Revolution. And it's essentially quite a republican poem in nature. He wrote this possibly about a year to a year and a half before he died.
Did we not know this about him anyway, that, that this was what he was like? That, we knew this stuff before. There's nothing particularly new in this.
No, this is not essentially new information. Although I've drawn on recent research from Robert Crawford, Patrick Scott Hogg, Marilyn Butler, Liam McIlvanney. These are the scholars that I've tried to draw upon for the factual information. And they have uncovered some new information. I mean, I loved Robert Crawford's biography of Burns, where he unveiled that a late visitor to him, just a few weeks before he died, 7 weeks before he died, referred to him as a staunch Republican. And this was new information that Robert Crawford uncovered. And I've tried to bring the spirit of this information into the performance. But I think people will be shocked at just how radical, how ferocious Burns's views were against the establishment. Because people do know he's a man of the people in general.
Well, listen, it sounds like you're going to have a lot of fun and expend a lot of energy. I hope you can keep up your energy levels. It's lovely to talk to you today, Kevin.
You too, Claire. Cheers.
Thanks for being on the show, Kevin Williamson. Robert Burns, Not in My Name, on at the National Library of Scotland at 7 p.m. till the 12th of August, then again from the 24th to the 28th. You can visit BBC Radio Scotland's audio archive of all of Burns' poems as well, if you want to do that too. That's it for today. Next Monday, 2 weeks of festival cafes. I hope you can join us then. For now, though, from the team, thanks for your time.